the waiting room of the blade, before the guillotine ever rose above her, before the crowd gathered and the blade gleamed in the Paris light, Marie Antoinette had already begun to die in a far quieter way. The revolution did not rush to kill her. It chose something slower, something more deliberate. It chose erasure. In the early hours of August 1793, while Paris still slept under a damp, uneasy silence, soldiers entered the Temple prison and tore her from the last fragments of family she had left. There were no formal charges read, no explanations offered, no moment granted to collect herself. She was no longer a queen, no longer even a widow of a king. She became a number. Prisoner 280. With that single act, the revolution stripped away her name and began transforming a living woman into a symbol meant to be destroyed. The conciergerie prison loomed beside, the Seine like a stone tomb disguised as a building. Parisians whispered its nickname with dread, the waiting room of the guillotine. Inside its walls, time did not pass normally. It rotted. Marie Antoinette was led through narrow corridors, slick with moisture, past iron doors and shadowed cells that echoed with coughing, murmured prayers, and the dull thud of despair. Her cell was small, cold, and soaked with dampness that crept into her clothes and skin. A thin pile of straw served as a bed. A single candle flickered as her only companion. Even that flame felt temporary, as if it too understood it would not last. Privacy, the final refuge of dignity, was denied with precision. 2 guards watched her day and night, not merely to prevent escape, but to remind her that she no longer owned even her own body. She slept beneath their eyes. She ate beneath their eyes. A crude wooden screen stood in the cell, mocking the idea of modesty, while the guards remained unmoving and silent. This was not simple imprisonment. It was surveillance as punishment. Every movement was a lesson. You are seen. You are powerless. You are already condemned. Outside the prison walls, Paris roared with revolutionary fervor, but inside, the world narrowed to dripping water and echoing footsteps. Days blurred together. There were no clocks, no news worth trusting, only distant sounds from the city that once adored her downfall. Vendors shouted. Bells rang. Life continued, indifferent to the woman decaying in stone. The revolution did not want her dead quickly. It wanted her humbled first, broken slowly, reduced from a crowned figure of silk and ceremony into a silent body waiting to be processed. And yet, within that crushing confinement, something unexpected began to form. Stripped of ceremony, surrounded by hostility, Marie Antoinette was forced to confront herself without illusion. Not the queen painted in pamphlets, not the monster blamed for a nation's hunger, but a woman alone with memory and loss. Every night, as the candle trembled, she replayed her past in fragments, laughter in Versailles, children's voices in palace gardens, the rising tide of hatred she had never fully understood. When had the shift occurred? When had a woman become a symbol worthy of ritual humiliation? The revolution believed it was preparing her for death. In truth, it was unknowingly forging something else. In that cell, beneath constant watch, surrounded by stone and silence, Marie Antoinette began the slow transformation from hated queen into something far more dangerous to her enemies. A witness, a reminder, a human being enduring what history would later struggle to explain. And this was only the beginning. The sun they used as a weapon, the moment that truly shattered Marie Antoinette did not happen in the courtroom or beneath the blade. It happened in the night when the revolution decided that her suffering was still incomplete. Long before she was taken to the conciergerie, while she was still held in the Temple prison, guards stormed her cell after midnight with a purpose far crueler than punishment. They were not there for her life. They were there for her child. Her son, Louis Charles, was only 8 years old. small enough to hide behind her skirts, old enough to understand fear, but too young to understand hatred. When the door burst open, she knew instinctively that something irreversible had arrived. She threw herself over the boy as the guards reached for him, clutching his thin shoulders, begging them to stop. Her pleas were not those of a queen demanding authority, but of a mother begging for mercy. It did not matter. The revolution had already decided that breaking Marie Antoinette required more than isolation. It required betrayal of the most sacred bond. The guards tore the child from her arms while he screamed her name, his voice echoing through the stone corridors. She fought until her strength failed, until her body was dragged backward and her hands slipped from his clothing. The door closed. The screams did not stop. They followed her into silence. From that night onward, time fractured. Her son was taken to a separate cell, placed under the control of men who saw him not as a child, but as a tool. They starved him of comfort, surrounded him with cruelty, and fed him lies until confusion replaced memory. They told him his mother had abandoned him. They told him she was evil. They coached him, threatened him, and shaped his words until he repeated phrases he could not possibly understand. Every sentence was designed not for truth, but for destruction. The revolution did not merely want Marie Antoinette dead. It wanted her morally annihilated dot in the conciergerie. She was denied any news of her son. That absence was deliberate. Silence became another weapon. She imagined him alone, frightened, calling for her in the dark. At night, when the guards finally spoke less and the prison grew quiet, she pressed her hands together and whispered his name like a prayer. It was the only rebellion left to her. Hidden beneath her clothing, she kept a small relic, a lock of his hair and a tiny portrait she had managed to save. It was forbidden comfort, but she risked punishment to keep it close. Without it, she feared she would forget the sound of his voice. Her captors watched her closely, hoping to see her break. Sometimes they mocked her openly, laughing about the king's execution, sneering at her foreign accent, taunting her with rumors about her children. They wanted tears. They wanted collapse. Instead, they witnessed something they did not expect. Marie Antoinette learned restraint. She moved slowly. She spoke less. She revealed nothing. Each insult was met with silence, not because she felt nothing, but because she understood that silence was the last space. They could not invade. What the revolution never understood was this. By using her son as a weapon, they did not erase her humanity. They exposed it. The queen they despised faded further into the background, while the mother endured in full clarity. In trying to humiliate her beyond recovery, they carved a wound so deep that it reshaped her entirely. And when the time came to drag her before the tribunal, it would be this wound, not politics. That would define the most dangerous moment of her trial, the tribunal that was never a trial, when the iron door of her cell opened before dawn in October 1793. Marie Antoinette already understood that this summons was not for justice. It was for display. The revolution had decided that her death must be performed in public, long before the guillotine ever touched her. The trial was simply another stage in the ritual. She was led through the damp corridors of the conciergerie, chains echoing softly against stone, escorted by armed guards whose boots struck the floor like funeral drums. She wore a plain black dress, the same one she had worn to mourn her husband. It was not defiance. It was remembrance. The Revolutionary Tribunal did not resemble a court. It resembled a theater. Torches flickered along the walls, casting restless shadows across the faces of judges, spectators, and accusers packed tightly together. The air was thick with sweat, anticipation, and hatred that had been cultivated for years. When Marie Antoinette entered, a murmur rolled through the chamber. Some leaned forward in excitement. Others stared in silence. unsettled by the sight of the fallen queen standing pale, yet composed. There were no jewels, no crown, no guards bowing. Only a thin woman facing a nation's rage. A prosecutor spoke loudly. Theatrically, his words crafted not to uncover truth, but to provoke reaction. He accused her of treason, of conspiring with foreign enemies, of draining France's wealth, of corrupting the morals of the people. Each charge was greeted with shouts, laughter, and applause. Evidence was irrelevant. Witnesses repeated rumors, lifted from pamphlets, exaggerations passed from mouth to mouth, lies refined through repetition. The crowd did not want facts. It wanted confirmation of its hatred. Marie Antoinette was given almost no chance to defend herself. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, controlled, stripped of outrage. She denied what she could, accepted what no denial could change. There was no illusion left. She knew the verdict had already been written. Still, she stood upright, refusing to collapse into the image they expected. That restraint unsettled the room more than anger ever could. Then came the accusation that froze even her enemies. The prosecutor paused deliberately before announcing it, savoring the shock. He claimed that she had committed incest with her own son. A silence swept through the tribunal, sharp and uncomfortable. The charge was monstrous, not because it was believable, but because it crossed a boundary even hatred rarely dares to cross. Her son, torn from her arms months earlier, had been forced to sign a confession, coached line by line by those who controlled him. The revolution had turned a child into a weapon. For a moment, Marie Antoinette did not move. Her face drained of color. The room waited, hungry for a reaction. Slowly, she rose. She did not look at the judges or the prosecutor. Instead, she turned toward the women in the audience, many of them mothers who had once marched demanding bread. Her voice, when she spoke, carried across the chamber, clear and steady. I appeal to all mothers who are here. Nothing more. She needed no explanation. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some lowered their eyes. Others shifted uncomfortably. For a brief instant, the caricature collapsed, replaced by a truth the revolution could not fully silence. A mother humiliated beyond cruelty. The moment passed quickly. The tribunal pressed on. The performance resumed. But something had cracked. And in that crack, history would later glimpse what fear and fury tried so hard to hide. The night they tried to bury her. Voice when Marie Antoinette was led back to her cell after the verdict was announced. The noise of the tribunal faded behind her like a door closing on the living world. The guards said nothing. They did not need to. She already knew what awaited her. Death had been decided long before the trial began. Yet what followed was not panic or collapse, but a strange stillness, as if the final weight of uncertainty had finally been lifted. In cell 280 of the conciergerie, night settled thick and damp, pressing against the stone walls and sinking into her bones. This would be her last night on earth. The cell felt smaller than ever. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, marking time more cruelly than any clock. The candle on the table burned low, its flame weak and trembling. Outside, the Seine murmured in the darkness, indifferent to the fate being sealed beside it. Marie Antoinette sat quietly, her hands folded, her posture composed. Those who had watched her suffer expected despair in these final hours. Instead, they witnessed something unsettling: acceptance. Her young attendant, Rosalie, remained close, fighting back tears. She offered food and water, small gestures of kindness that now carried immense weight. Marie Antoinette refused gently. She told her that she needed nothing more, that everything had already been taken, and that clinging to the body no longer mattered. What mattered now was the voice she still possessed, fragile but unbroken. She asked for paper and a quill dot As she began to write, her hand trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion. The letter was addressed to her sister-in-law, the only family member she believed might still hear her words. She did not write of the tribunal, nor of the lies spoken against her. She wrote of forgiveness. She asked that her daughter be cared for, that her son be remembered not for the words forced upon him, but for the child he truly was. She insisted that he should never be blamed for what had been done to him. Every sentence was stripped of bitterness. Every line was an act of resistance. This letter was never meant for history. It was meant to preserve a truth the revolution wanted erased. In forgiving those who destroyed her, Marie Antoinette denied them their final victory. She refused to become the monster they needed her to be. The guards would later seize this letter, locking it away in archives, where it remained hidden for decades. Even her final words were considered dangerous. When the quill finally rested, the candle had burned almost to nothing. Melted wax spilled across the table like tears frozen in place. Rosalie could no longer hold herself together and began to weep. Marie Antoinette reached for her hand and spoke softly, telling her not to cry, reminding her that dignity mattered more than fear. These were not the words of a queen. They were the words of someone who had suffered enough to see beyond herself. Later, when the guards returned, their footsteps echoed with finality. They informed her that dawn would bring the end. She asked only for a moment alone. Kneeling on the cold stone floor, she prayed quietly, not for survival, but for her children. When she rose, the fear that had once haunted her was gone. In the darkness of that cell, as the candle finally went out, the revolution believed it had silenced her. In truth, it had preserved her voice forever. The ritual of stripping dawn arrived without mercy. It did not creep in gently or offer warning. It came with the grinding of iron locks and the sharp scrape of boots against stone. Marie Antoinette rose before the guards fully entered, as if she had been waiting for them rather than the other way around. There was no confusion left, no questions to ask. This was the morning the revolution had prepared her for through weeks of humiliation. But before the guillotine, there was one final ceremony to complete. A ritual designed not to kill her body, but to erase what remained of her dignity. The guards informed her she must change clothes. The order was delivered plainly, almost casually, as if requesting something insignificant. She was told to remove the black dress she had worn since her husband's execution. That dress was more than mourning fabric. It was the last visible link to her past, to love, to memory. She asked quietly for privacy. The answer came with a smirk. There were no queens here. She was forced to change behind a poorly placed screen, while men stood watching, unmoved. Even modesty, the final refuge of the condemned, was denied. They handed her a rough white linen gown, stiff and unfamiliar against her skin. It was the color of penitence, the uniform of those about to die. Silk and lace had once followed her every movement. Now coarse fabric scratched her wrists and neck. When she finished dressing, she looked almost unreal, a pale figure stripped of ornament, standing in the gray morning light like a ghost already half removed from the world. The transformation was intentional. The revolution wanted her reduced, visually and symbolically, before the crowd ever saw her. Then came the next order. Her hair must be cut. There was no explanation offered, though the reason was clear. Long hair belonged to royalty, to femininity, to identity. It had to be taken. Marie Antoinette bowed her head without protest. Rusted scissors hacked through her hair without care or ceremony. Strands fell to the stone floor, mixing with dust and straw. Her once blonde hair, now pale from grief and imprisonment, scattered like fragments of her former life. No one paused. No one acknowledged the cruelty. This was procedure. Afterward, her wrists were bound tightly with rope. The fibers dug into her skin, biting with each movement. She questioned it softly, asking why such measures were necessary. Her husband, she noted, had not been bound. There was no reply. Silence was the answer. The binding was not about safety. It was about control, about making sure the crowd saw submission. Even her most basic needs became tools of humiliation. She was forced to ask permission for acts no human should have to request under guard. Each small indignity was deliberate, another step in the ritual meant to display her fall. The revolution believed that by stripping away her humanity piece by piece, they would prove their triumph complete. Yet something strange happened. Instead of breaking, Marie Antoinette grew quieter, steadier. She did not plead. She did not resist. Her composure unsettled those around her. In trying to erase her dignity, they unintentionally revealed it. By the time the executioner stepped forward and announced it was time to go, the woman before them no longer resembled the caricature of hatred they had created. She was simply human. And that, to a revolution built on rage, was the most dangerous thing of all. The last human sentence the wooden cart waited outside the prison gates. Rough and open, the kind reserved for thieves and common criminals. There would be no closed carriage this time, no curtain to shield her from the eyes of Paris. Marie Antoinette stepped forward without hesitation, her bound hands steady, her white gown catching the cold morning air. As the cart began to move, the city revealed itself in layers of sound and hostility. Bells rang, vendors shouted, drums echoed in the distance. Paris had gathered not just to witness an execution, but to confirm a belief it had repeated for years. The journey through the streets was slow, almost ceremonial. Crowds pressed in from every direction, faces twisted with anger, curiosity, and something darker. Insults were hurled. Laughter followed. Some pointed. Others stared in silence, unsettled by what they saw. They had expected a broken woman, a sobbing monster dragged toward justice. Instead, they saw composure. Marie Antoinette stood upright in the cart, her gaze fixed ahead, her expression calm. The wind moved through her cropped hair, exposing her face fully, without protection. Her silence disturbed the crowd more than any scream could have. Artists watched from balconies. Soldiers lined the streets, and children were lifted onto shoulders to see her pass. History was being staged in real time. When the cart jolted over uneven stones, she stumbled briefly and corrected herself without assistance. No one helped her. No one needed to. The woman who had lost everything refused to let the final spectacle define her. Somewhere in the crowd, a whisper moved from mouth to mouth. She does not look afraid. At last, the cart turned and the guillotine came into view, its dark wooden frame standing stark against the pale sky. The square pulsed with anticipation. Thousands pressed closer. Marie Antoinette lifted her chin slightly, as if acknowledging the end of the road. When the cart stopped, the executioner stepped down first. He offered his hand to assist her. She declined politely and stepped down on her own, her bound wrists limiting her balance, but not her resolve. As she climbed the wooden steps, something unexpected happened. Her foot brushed against the executioner's. It was a small accident, insignificant in any other moment. She paused, turned toward him, and spoke softly. "Forgive me, sir. I did not do it on purpose." The words fell into the noise of the crowd like a blade of their own. For a brief instant, the shouting seemed to falter. This was not the voice of a tyrant or a villain. It was the voice of a human being, offering courtesy at the edge of death. Those words would outlive the cheers that followed. As she was positioned beneath the blade, she showed no fear, no resistance. The mechanism was released. Steel fell. The sound was sharp and final. The crowd erupted. Her body was removed, her head lifted briefly as proof, then lowered again into anonymity. She was carried away to a mass grave, denied a marker, denied ceremony, denied memory dot, and yet the revolution failed in its final goal. It killed her body, but not her meaning. That quiet apology, spoken in the face of violence, became her final sentence to history. Long after the square emptied and the guillotine was dismantled, those words endured. In the end, Marie Antoinette did not reclaim her crown. She reclaimed something far more unsettling to her enemies: her humanity.